Greetings to everyone and a very warm welcome or welcome back to those who already attended our previous events on behalf of ECOS Institute. I'm Mihaela Ionescu, I'm the Program Director at ESA, and it is a real pleasure to open this event in our ECOS series on leadership in early childhood education and care. At ECOS, we have been bringing together people who care deeply about early childhood systems, people who work at the intersection of policy, practice, and research. What connects our past conversation is a shared recognition that improving early childhood system, it's not only about what we do, but about how we lead also. And that is why today's conversation matters. Because across Europe and globally, we are asking more and more from those who lead early childhood services. We expect them to support teams, to ensure quality, engage families, navigate complex systems, and often drive the system change itself. And yet, while being an increasing demanding role, leadership in ECEC is still too under-supported, sometimes over-administrative, yet more and more complex and under-recognized. This event is grounded in the important work of the European Commission's Working Group on Early Childhood Education and Care, particularly the report on leadership competencies and training. It reminds us that leadership is not an add-on to quality early childhood education and care. It's a core condition for it. It shapes the environment in which professionals work, the culture of reflection and collaboration, and ultimately the quality of experiences that children and family live by attending early childhood education and care services. But it also brings forward a tension that perhaps many of you will recognize. We expect transformation without always building the capacity for it. So today is about asking, what does it actually take to professionalize leadership in early childhood education and care? What competencies matter most today and tomorrow? And how do we move from well-articulated policy frameworks to real systems that support leaders in practice? Because having competencies profile is important, but not always sufficient. The real challenge is turning them into training pathways in career structures and professional recognition that truly work. Leadership is the thread that connects vision to practice. At ECOS, we see this as part of a broader journey. So today is also an invitation to make leadership visible, to make it intentional, and to make it possible. We're bringing together different perspectives across different systems and realities, not to compare, but to learn, and not to prescribe, but to understand what it takes to build leadership that is grounded, is distributed, and sustainable. I hope this conversation will be both honest and forward-looking, recognizing the complexity, but also the opportunity that we have in front of us. So thank you for being here and for contributing your experiences and insights to this conversation. I'm inviting now Géraldine Libreau, Policy Officer at Early Childhood Education and Care at the European Commission, who led the work of the working group in the past 8 years, to provide more insights coming from the work that the group has carried on in these years and moderate the discussion on this very important topic. So Géraldine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mihaela, for having me and organizing this webinar. It's really a great chance to share all the work that has been done with the working group. And before we dive a little bit into what we have been doing on leadership, I just want to give a bit of background. So if we can have my slides, please. So I will explain a little bit what we are talking about when we talk about this European working group on early childhood education and care. So if we can go to the next one and maybe, yeah, perfect, let's go. So the context for this working group to exist is that in 2019, we had a very important policy text which was adopted, which was the Council recommendation on high quality early childhood education and care systems. And this text, which was adopted by the 27 ministers of education, defines what quality should look like in early childhood education and care. It's based on 5 equally important pillars. One of them is access to ECEC services. Another one is staff, and I'll come back to that. Another one is curriculum, to make sure that we are not talking about just childcare and babysitting, but really giving educational opportunities to children and providing them with a solid pedagogical framework. And of course, governance and funding, monitoring and evaluation are the structural pillars on which the system should be built. And to come back to staff, we have been working on staff, looking at which qualifications should the staff have, what trainings, what career opportunities they should be given. And in this context, we have been looking at leaders in particular over the past 2 years. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to explain who is in this working group. So we have at European level a framework to discuss education between member states, which is called the European Education Area. And within this, we have a lot of tools to work together. And one of them is working groups. So we have working groups on school education, higher education, vet, and so on. And we have one for early childhood education and care. So who's in this group? We have three types of participants. The biggest group are the national representatives. So these are people who come from the ministries in all the European countries who are in charge of organizing the ECEC systems. We also have the voice of stakeholders who come with their expertise and their vision. And you can see that we have a lot of them, a lot of acronyms, but basically they are representing the voice of children, of teachers, and anyone involved in early childhood education and care and who has expertise to share with the policymakers. And then we also have a third group of participants coming from the OECD, UNESCO, UNICEF, again, trying to bring all the expertise that we can get and build bridges between the work done at European level and also done at international level. So this is in a nutshell who is in this working group and how it works a little bit. So everything we do is looking at research, identify policy questions and challenges, look at the research, what does it tell us, look at the different practices, and then discuss how to improve the quality of ECEC across Europe altogether. So if we can go to the next one, as I mentioned, we have been working on leadership over the past 2 years. This was a choice made by the member states and by the working group because we had done a lot of work previously on staff, but we felt we needed to give a specific focus to leaders as they are the one really giving the biggest impetus and making things happen in the setting. So we thought we really needed to recognize who they were, how important they were, and see how we could support them. Next, please. So we came up over 2 years with 3 thematic reports, and you will have the link and the slides after this event. We have first explored the models and practices of leadership in ECEC across Europe, and there are many ways of looking at how leadership is organized. And we really talked a lot about the fact that leadership is not a one-person job, but it can be a team's job, and it also involves the different layers of governance which are involved in a structure. So the way leadership is defined at national level also has an impact on how leadership is organized at local level and in the setting itself. In the second report, which will be the focus of our webinar today, we looked at the competencies and training required by leaders, and we proposed a leader competence profile. You will have more information on that in a minute. And then in our third report, which will be the topic of a next webinar coming up before the summer, we have been talking about early childhood education and development, trying to build holistic strategy to serve the needs of children and families. You will also see that we had 3 peer learning activities which were organized in the different countries because we really tried to have a very important look at the realities on the ground, and we had some specific topics for these 3 peer learning activities which you can look at in detail. So that was a lot of work on leadership, but we also worked at another topic. If we can go to the next one, please. Just for your information, and next one, we had a specific peer learning activity dedicated to digitalization on ECEC. So it was a completely different topic, and the idea was to look at the impact of digitalization on children, on staff, on systems, and on families. So I will just leave you with the key messages there. I will not read them, but I will very much invite you to look at the report, which is available online, because it includes a lot of research findings, considerations, practices, and also a lot of food for thoughts, because this is still a new thing for the ECEC system, which has been quite shy in approaching digitalization, but we felt that we really need to work on the opportunities and challenges. So this is just food for thought for you. Have a look at this report, and then hopefully that will also inspire your work. Thank you. So we can close the slides now. As I mentioned in my presentation, the working group has delivered 3 main reports, and today we're looking at the second one, which is dedicated to competencies and training required by ECEC leaders. The lead author of this report, Hester Hulpia, will walk us through the findings of this report. Unfortunately, Hester cannot be with us today, but she has sent us her presentation. So if we could please now have a Hester's video, so we get a closer look at the competencies and trainings required by ECEC leaders. Thank you.
Hello to all of you. I have the honor to introduce you to the topic of leadership in ECEC and all the inspiring work we did together with the working group of the European Commission. Unfortunately, I can't attend real live, but it's with a great pleasure that I record this video. With the working group, we worked during 2 years on the topic of leadership in ECEC. We talked about leadership models and practices of ECEC center leaders, the needed competences, initial and in-service trainings, and we went more broad and focused on network leadership, supporting integrated work across sectors and between different levels of education. In all the work we do, we start from the triangle research, policy, and practice. So we use the input from important research reports like the TALI studies, reports from the European Commission, the key data reports from Eurydice, but also from practice, stories from leaders and study visits, and of course the input from rich discussions with the members of the working group. If we want to talk about leadership, it's an important step to first unravel the concept. And by doing so, we have to mention that ECEC leadership is a very diversified workforce with huge differences between countries and the age range of the services. There are many differences between European countries, but also within individual countries. Some ECEC leaders are the only staff members in their service, and this is, for example, the case for childminders. Some are leaders of a small ECEC center, whereas others have several services to manage. In some countries, the leader of the primary school is also the leading person of the pre-primary service. Some leaders only have a leading role, while others also work directly with children. In some countries, there is a single ECEC center leader, but in many countries, the roles are distributed among different staff members. So it's clear, it's not a unified professional role. Therefore, it's crucial to explicitly define what we are talking about. And we built on previous definitions and came to the common ground that the ECEC leader is the person who is ultimately responsible for the administrative, managerial, and/or pedagogical leadership at the ECEC center. He or she is responsible for the children, but also for the staff, the contact with the parents, and also more practical information. Now, if we take a closer look to the ECC reality, we see that most ECC leaders are women. And most ECC leaders have extensive experience, 10 years or more. And therefore, they are in an older age range, for example, sometimes over 50 years old. A main question is, of course, why is ECC leadership so important? And it is so important as it influences indirectly children's development, learning, and well-being. Now, let's take a look at the functions that ECC center leaders have to perform. In general, 5 different clusters of leadership functions can be distinguished. It's about pedagogical leadership, so leadership function needed to support a high quality and inclusive educational environment, nurturing children's well-being, socialization, learning, and development. The second one is the administrative leadership. It's about the management of operations, including human resources and financing. Third, the engagement with parents, legal guardians, and families. It's about shaping expectations for the center's engagement with parents or guardians, so that they are reciprocally involved in the learning and development of their children. There is also the engagement with the community. So that is establishing effective links with the community and partnerships with other child and family-oriented services. And a final function is supporting and contributing to policy making, as ECC leaders can play a significant role in sustaining the development of high-quality ECC provision for all children. Based on previous research, for example the TALI Starting Strong survey, it is stated that there are high levels of overall job satisfaction among ECC leaders. However, they face some huge challenges. For example, their role is quite unclear. Often they don't feel prepared. They feel as a lone job or sometimes a sandwiched position. They have a rather low salary with low status. They have to do many different tasks with many different responsibilities. Often they feel that there is a lot of administrative work and there is a lack of time to focus on pedagogy. Also, the problem of or the lack of qualified staff and the lack of resources. So, also changing and complex regulations and challenging times in ECC make it a very heavy job. Next, we see that ECC leaders often become a leader by accident. They don't feel well prepared and often they experience a rather flawed career path. So we have to be aware of these challenges as they don't have a positive impact on the attractivity of ECC leadership, and this might lead to a shortage of leaders in the sector. So it's clear, leadership in ECC is a very challenging job, and they often have an unclear understanding of their role. Therefore, real, clear job profiles and competence requirements are needed. Therefore, with Working Group, we reflected on the wide range of tasks and responsibilities attached to ECC leadership. We reflected on the competences required for ECC leaders. We came to the common ground that a competence profile for ECC leaders outlines the key competences required for effective leadership in high-quality, inclusive early childhood settings. And although there were some in-depth discussions, we all agreed that defining a competence profile has important benefits. It ensures high-quality, inclusive ECC. It ensures effective leadership and strengthens leadership capacity. It enhances confidence for ECC leaders, it promotes consistency, it streamlines recruitment and selection, and it facilitates initial training and professional development. Nevertheless, we are also aware that there are challenges in designing competence profiles. That's related to the diversity of roles and responsibilities, of course, the complex and evolving environment, and the practical challenges of implementation. And we were aware of some basic principles to design the competence profile for ECC leaders. For example, they have to be context-specific and they should be grounded in principles that prioritize children's holistic development, well-being and learning, inclusion, equity, and family and community engagement. Also, it's very important that inputs from other stakeholders are considered. So the competence profile we developed clustered around 7 competencies. The first competency is leadership and management. The second competency is pedagogy. Third, it's also important to focus on interpersonal communication and team management. Another competence is diversity and inclusion. And of course, professionalism and ethics. And a final competence is community engagement. And of course, it's very important to restate that this should be adapted by user depending on their own national, regional, local, or professional context. It is clear that the needed competences demand highly qualified staff. Now, what's the state of play in Europe? The key data report on ECEC shows that often leaders are qualified at the bachelor level or higher in most countries. We see, of course, a huge difference between the integrated and the split systems. And in many countries, we also see that previous work experience is needed for ECC leaders. So often they are quite well trained because they have previous requirements like courses or trainings or work experience, but still they feel or experience a reality gap. As ECC leadership is a demanding job, ECC leaders should be supported in fulfilling their multiple functions and roles. This support should imply, among other things, of course, support in understanding their role, information on current ECC policies and regulations, but also support in developing the necessary skills to fulfill their various demands. So this support should come from both initial training and ongoing professional learning. So to conclude, so this really demands a systemic approach to support ECC center leaders with clear competence profiles, clear qualification requirements, strong initial training, effective CPD pathways with ongoing mentoring and coaching, and policy alignment across all levels of ECC. If you feel inspired, please read the documents that are mentioned here. And if you have any questions, you can always email us. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very interesting session.
Okay, so I think you have had already a good overview of the report, and of course, I invite you to have a look at the full report, as it really includes a lot more information and detailed competence profile. Also examples from different cities or different countries of competence profile, which can be adapted to your own context. I see in the chat that some people have difficulties accessing. We have had technical issues with our European School Education platform for users outside of Europe. So I suggest that we collect the email addresses from the registrants who cannot access the reports, and we can always send them by email. So let's move on now to the next part of our event, We have invited 3 guests to share their perspectives on the competencies needed by ECEC leaders and how to support these leaders' careers. So I'm very happy to introduce them and to first welcome Toby. Toby Wolf is the Principal Officer at the Department of Children, Disability and Equality of Ireland. And I also should add that Toby is a member of the European Working Group for ECEC. We also have Nadia Ferreira from Portugal. Nadia is professor at ISPA, the Instituto Superior de Psicologia Aplicada, and really I apologize for my Portuguese pronunciation. And finally, from Slovenia, we have Marko Sterle, the head of the School for Leadership in Education at the National Education Institute. So many thanks to all 3 of you for being with us today. I would like to start the discussion today with the first question to you all. Which leadership competencies matter most today in early childhood education and care? And which competencies are still underestimated, undervalued, or invisible in policy? And I will start by asking Toby. Toby, Ireland has been working intensively on reforming the ECEC system over the last years. And also you have adopted a workforce plan called the Nurturing Skills, I believe. So in this context, what can you tell us about defining the competencies of leaders?
So thanks, Geraldine, and very delighted to be on part of this webinar. Like, I think the question about which competencies matter most is a very hard question. As I think a key feature, and I think Hester made it very clear in her presentation, a key feature and a key challenge of leadership is that leaders have to have a wide range of competencies at the same time. I think a strength of the competence profile in the EU Working Group report is its breadth. I think it shows like the wide range of competencies that matter, and they all matter. And that's one of the main difficulties that face leaders of services. So much is expected of them, but at the same time, they often have so little support. I think a linked challenge is the diverse competencies that leaders need don't all match the backgrounds that leaders come from. Hester noted some leaders becoming leaders by accident, for example. And in Ireland, many centre leaders have historically been educators by training, but as leaders find themselves now acting as managers and administrators. And then conversely, at the same time, we have some in Ireland where the model of ECEC provision is a private model of provision. So we have some who have gone straight into leadership roles from business backgrounds, for example, or other sectoral backgrounds, and may not have the pedagogical background. So what's missing and what needs most support will vary between different leaders depending on their background. I think a further challenge is the different requirements on leaders come from different sources. Administrative requirements are set by legislation, maybe, or rules set by funding bodies. Pedagogical roles arise from quality frameworks or the curriculum, and other requirements may just arise in the course of the work, the need to engage with parents, communities, and so on. So I think one of the values of an explicit competence profile for leaders and for training programs that build on that competence profile is a way to bring together the diverse requirements on leaders in a clear way. And that's something certainly we had in mind when we were working on the competence profiles that we built into Nurturing Skills, our workforce plan for the sector that I'll talk more about perhaps a little later. But certainly we hear leaders in Ireland talking a lot about the need for support. And that's certainly something that came up in the recent OECD Talis Starting Strong survey, which Ireland took part in 2024. Leaders talk about the need for more support in time. They talk about the need for a reduced administrative burden. So last year in Ireland, we published a report called Simplify to Support, which set out a range of commitments to reduce the administrative burden on leaders. And they also look for more external guidance and coaching on pedagogical approaches. But I think one area of support in particular, and I'll talk more about this later as well, is about distributed leadership. I think it's a valuable way of providing support with multiple benefits, sharing leadership and tasks across a team, so not all the weight is on one person's shoulders. while at the same time supporting career pathways. And that's certainly been a strong focus of the work in Ireland, is trying to think how we can support distributed leadership. So I suppose, like an answer to your question, I'm reluctant to single out a particular competence that matters most. If I were to name one, though, it would be in the area of reflective practice and the commitment to ongoing self-reflection and improvement. It's in that area, in those 7 themes that Hester spoke about in the report, of professionalism and ethics. And that issue around reflective practice, it's closely linked to the competence of staff supervision and development. And I think it's that process of self-evaluation, not just at an individual level, but also at a whole team level. And the leader is key in that sort of whole team self-evaluation. That's really key to quality improvement. And it offers a way for any leader to identify areas that need improvement in their service, whatever those areas are, and to address them. So I would sort of focus perhaps in on that area of reflective practice and professionalism. And that's support for self-evaluation. That's in Ireland, that's a strong focus of the mentoring support we already make available to services. And we're committed to further strengthening our support for self-evaluation through work underway at the moment on a new quality framework.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Toby. So now we will turn to Nadia, who is from Portugal, where the kindergartens are part of schools clusters and where the coordination across institutions is really important to ensure quality education. So Nadia, in your opinion, what leadership competencies matter most today in early childhood education and care? And are there some competencies which need to be better recognized or valued?
Thank you. As we saw in the previous presentations, the reality in Portugal is very diverse. We have organizations, non-profit organizations, private and public, for early childhood. And this brings a lot of diverse profiles of the leaders, but kindergarten teachers have a very important role in this, as Toby said, join in responsibility about the leadership of the organization. We think that to be a professional in education, it mostly is to become a researcher about their own practice about organization, pedagogical practice, and curriculum practice. So if we can engage from initial training, and then when, for example, in Portugal, we have this 3 years degree and then a master's of 2 years to become a kindergarten teacher, and then you have to have 5 years of practice and then a course of leadership to become a principal. So you can see that we have a long path to become a principal in the public schools, and we think it's very important that they research their own practice. We educate kindergarten teachers doing that initial training, and then when they go to the courses of to become a principal, we see it in 3 main pillars. People, because people, pedagogic, and projects. So why people? People is important, relation between people is very important. It is important to engage people in collaborative environments, to gain trust, and to arise the quality of the group and of the organization. For example, our research in our university shows that we can give time to people to work together, but if they don't trust each other and if they don't build a new good climate of relations, they don't work together. So this is very important, to have competence about relations and how to manage people is very, very important. And to do that, we engage our future principals in research about neuroscience or about how to manage people resources, human resources, and how to think together about the projects that we have to do in our organizations, because with projects, with innovation, we can make policies at micro and meso and macro levels. The other idea is pedagogy. It's very important that leaders have very strong ideas about pedagogy. And for example, in Portugal, we have these pedagogical guides for 0 to 3, and then the curriculum guidelines for 3 to 6. And it's very important that the leaders know very well these kind of documents that the Minister of Education published, put at discussion and publish, and how to engage the whole organization to overcome these guidelines and to build interventions that aim the quality of education in early child and after early child. And then I will speak a little bit more about that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nadia. Now let's move to Slovenia with Marco. So Marco, it's great to see that Slovenia's National Education Institute has a special school for leadership in education, which you are heading. So I would like to ask you the same question as our first two speakers. Based on your experience, what are the most important leadership competencies today for ECEC leaders? And are there some which need to be better recognized or valued?
Well, thank you for the invitation. Let me start with the notion and maybe point out our thinking processes into understanding what leadership quality is about.
Marco, sorry, can you put your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth or something? The sound is not great at the moment.
What about now?
A little bit more, maybe?
Better?
Yes, slightly. Yeah.
I will type up. Let's start with the notion. I hope you hear me now. Is it better?
Yes.
Yeah. Leadership quality is a key lever for pedagogical quality, workforce sustainability, and equity. This is like my starting point in thinking about the question. But however, there remains a significant gap between what competencies matter most in practice and what is fully recognized and supported in policy and leadership preparation systems. I try to focus on at least three competencies that matter the most. And I start with pointing out pedagogical leadership as the core competence, about understanding that this competence includes the ability of leading curriculum, interpretation, implementation, creating a shared pedagogical vision, supporting high-quality interactions and learning environments, and fostering professional dialogue and continuous improvement. I would say that in Slovenia, this competence is particularly relevant because kindergartens operate within a national curriculum. By the way, it was renewed at the beginning of this school year, that emphasizes professional autonomy, reflection, and child-centered pedagogy. Of course, the principal is legally defined as a pedagogical leader, which provides a strong mandate for this role, but however, in practice, pedagogical leadership often competes with administrative and legal demands. The second area that I find very important is leading professional learning, mentoring, and inducting. Another increasingly important competence if we think about the ability to lead adult learning. This includes mentoring, novice teachers, students, supporting professional development, also experienced staff, building learning-oriented teams, professional communities. And again, in Slovenia, in the Slovenian context, mentoring is strongly embedded in professional culture, but leadership responsibility for mentoring is often implicit rather than explicit. The third part I would like to emphasize is leading reflective practice, team-based quality development. This aligns closely with the Slovenian professional values and traditions. However, many leaders report limited preparation for leading reflection at team level, especially in complex or multi-unit kindergartens. But on the other hand, when I think about which are the competencies that are still underestimated, I wouldn't say invisible, but maybe less visible, I would focus on relational and emotional leadership, competencies related to building trust, supporting staff well-being, managing conflicts, sustaining motivation, professional identity. And if we're honest, those skills and competencies are usually quite often labeled as soft skills, and they remain weakly formalized in policy. The second one would be mentoring as a formal leadership responsibility. We have and offer quite an important program called mentorship, mentoring the new ECCC leaders, but not only ECC leaders. And we do understand that while mentoring is widely expected in practice, it is rarely clearly defined as a leadership competence in a wider setting. The gap is particularly visible in leadership preparation, including programs that are part of our school for leadership, where mentoring is present but not always framed as a core leadership function. The last part, I would stress out pedagogical sense-making, value-based leadership. Of course, we know that ECC leaders are expected to translate policy reforms, curriculum frameworks, accountability requirements into what? A meaningful pedagogical practice. But this competence of sense-making, deeply rooted in values and professional judgment, is crucial, but often remains, as I said, less visible in competence profiles. Let me conclude this first part that the leadership competencies that matter most are those rooted in pedagogy, professional learning, relationships, and values. In the Slovenian context, these competencies are strongly aligned with the curriculum and professional culture, but they remain partly underestimated. The challenge, of course, is not defining new competencies, but making visible, explicit, and supported those that already sustain quality in practice. Let me end with this.
Thank you. I think you really gave us a good overview of all the things which are really, really important to make good leaders. So we've seen that the range of competencies required from leaders is very wide. And I really believe also, after working for 2 years with the working group, that designing competence profiles is a very good start to highlight this whole range of competencies. But now the question is, how can we turn these competence profiles into real training, into career pathways, into professional recognition, rather than having them as nice inspirational documents? How to go from policy and objectives to reality? And to start on this question, we'll stay with you, Marco. What is your vision on this as the head of a school which trains future and current education leaders?
Maybe we start with trying to understand that probably we need to shift from competence profiles to compulsory practice-based trainings, something very visible, and I would also say concrete, making leadership competences operational through compulsory trainings, different programs that can emphasize selected topics. In Slovenia, the legal definition of the principle already includes pedagogical leadership, as I said, as the core responsibility. not only in kindergartens, also in schools. And this provides a strong foundation for our programs. Explicitly align program modules with the ECEC leadership competencies. It's maybe an option. Differentiate ECEC leadership from general school management and focus preparation on pedagogical leadership, mentoring, and reflective practice. As I mentioned before, we have some things that are mandatory. A new principal has to pass a so-called exam for a leadership in education. But after this period of 1 year that is compulsory, there are different options where they can choose programs of going into deep or trying to understand more concretely and deeply what in their practice they need. And for example, the program of monitoring the new principles is one of those programs. And of course, I do believe that we have to try to build into our everyday life mentoring and induction as a systematic, not informal process that emphasizes, for example, something that is provided a structured induction and mentoring, especially in the first year of leadership. We are in a period of trying to renegotiate the framework of our programs accordingly, and we do try to hear the voices into action from different parts of educational settings, where explicitly ICC's leaders say, let us try to be more focused on our area of expertise, not to stay in a general framework. And that's why we try to serve as a systematic anchor by preparing principles explicitly for mentoring roles, embedding mentor leadership practice into initial preparation, and of course, supporting mandatory mentoring for newly appointed leaders. The next thing that I've got to point out is linking competencies to career pathways and professional recognition. We do understand that principals carry high levels of responsibility, but leadership development is only loosely connected to differentiated career pathways, explicit professional recognition, and long-term leadership progression by positioning leadership competences at the core of a program. We also can be, let's call us a gatekeeper of professional standards, ensuring competence development as visible, leadership learning as a tangible value, and of course, pedagogical leadership as recognized as a professional achievement, not merely an administrative burden. At the end, I should point out also the reinforcing competencies through reflective professional culture. This aligns closely with the Slovenia kindergarten curriculum and professional discourse, which emphasize reflection and collaboration. Leadership programs at our School for Principals therefore play a key role in modeling reflective practices, using real pedagogical dilemmas as a learning material, and reinforcing leadership as a cultural and pedagogical practice. Yeah, that would be quite concisely what I think.
Thank you, Marco. So now back to Portugal, and I would like to ask you the same question, Nadia. How do you think we can turn competence profiles into real training, career pathways, professional recognition?
So I completely agreed with Marco, and I don't take nothing of said, but I want to put another idea in the table. That is the idea of networking. Networking is very important. Internationally, networking is truly important to understand other practice, other ideas, and other realities. And early child professionals, leaders, have to be in very strong international networks to understand other ways of doing, and sometimes to recognize themselves the qualities of the systems and of their own professional competence. In Portugal, in the last 10 years, we have built, I saw, is my way of seeing Portugal. I see Portugal as a network of networks. And one of the networks that we have is the network of schools clusters of very vulnerable territories. These kind of schools are truly discussing the pedagogical issues, and one of them is about transitions and continuities in transitions. And this become a very important issue in Portugal, and the leaders and the principals have discussed the way of how they could be better doing that, the transition, for example, from kindergarten to primary school. And it's very clear for me that the network of principals and leaders and teachers and kindergarten teachers that are leaders in the organizations need to discuss this between them and need to discuss this with the other teachers to have a complete vision, integrate a more systematic approach about the transitions and continuities that we have to have between families and school, between early child and primary school path, and because we know that very highly quality early education, it's predatory of the quality and success in the future school and issues about retention and early drop. So I will say again, it's very important to engage the leaders in networking, international networking, national networking, and community networking between teachers, between parents and teachers, between other technicians, other professionals and teachers and early child teachers. So networking.
I think that's very clear, and that's a very good point. We also try to engage into networking at European level. So this is where ECOS, I think, the ECOS Institute can really help also in bringing exchanges and learning from each other. This is the key, of course, to learn and to compare. So this is a very good point. Also, I like very much your point on transitions. This is something which we need to improve, I think, quite a lot across Europe.
We have different, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have different, I have to work with several schools all over the world, the country, about this issue, and we put teachers and kindergarten teachers working together to articulate the curriculum, to engage in different activities, to have more continuity between the different paths, different stages of education. This is a very important issue that we have to address.
Thank you very much. So finally, we are returning to Ireland, and Toby, as a national policymaker, how do you think we can help the ECEC leaders develop their competencies and careers?
Thanks, Géraldine. Well, I'm going to talk about the example of Ireland, not because we've solved the problem, but because it's a work in progress. We've made some improvements, and we plan to make more. The area of supporting leadership is an area that we are, I suppose, actively working on, but just really at an early stage of our work. So in 2021, we published a report called Nurturing Skills. It's our workforce plan for the sector, and it runs through to 2028. But I think many of the actions are going to keep moving on beyond that. And it has a number of commitments in it. One of the main purposes of this workforce plan, Nurturing Skills, is to support the achievement of a commitment we had to a graduate-led sector. We have this ambition that all of those in leadership roles in the sector, both those who are in leadership roles working with a group of children in a room. We call them lead educators. They might be called teachers in some contexts, and also those who are center leaders, whether that's of a big setting or a small setting. Our vision is that they should all have bachelor's degrees, but also have more than that. And I'll talk through some of what we are trying to achieve in nurturing skills. So we set out in nurturing skills 3 roles in settings: the educator, a lead educator or teacher, and the center manager or center leader. And we set out competence profiles for those different roles. They very much match the competence profiles that are in the EU Working Group report. We had the benefit of working on the 2 projects in, somewhat at the same time, so we were able to get some. There was some alignment there, and those 3 roles are the same roles for all ages of children, birth to 6. The leadership roles in centres are tied to qualification expectations. In the past, in Ireland, there were no qualification requirements for centre leaders at all. We now have this target of moving towards bachelor's degrees for all, but also we are planning to introduce qualification requirements for centre leaders for the first time. The competence profiles are also tied to funding for training to achieve those qualification requirements. So we have a Nurturing Skills Learner Fund to support staff to upskill to bachelor's degrees while continuing to work in services. And the different roles are also tied to different minimum pay rates. So the different roles that we identified in nurturing skills were also explicitly named in legislation that we have that underpins different minimum pay rates for each role. So it was an attempt for the first time, to try to concretely embed a career pathway in recognition in salary scales tied to these competence profiles. I'd also stress that nurturing skills emphasizes, as well as those 3 roles, it emphasizes distributed leadership. So we put a lot of emphasis in our workforce plan on distributed leadership, both as a way of sharing leadership tasks across teams to manage workloads, but also as a concrete way of supporting career pathways for educators to become lead educators and then to build leadership skills and to become center managers over time. In looking at strengthening distributed leadership, we are building on one particular model that we developed a number of years ago that has been proving successful. In 2016, we introduced a distributed leadership role of inclusion coordinator as part of our work on the access and inclusion model, supporting children with disabilities to be included in settings. And this inclusion coordinator role is now present in 2/3 of ECEC settings in the country. We defined the role of inclusion coordinator. It could be anybody in the service. If in a small service, it might be the center leader themselves, but in a larger service, it may be another member of staff. So it could be anybody with this extra role of supporting inclusive practice across the service. We developed a special training program. It's a 1-year training program on leadership for inclusion, completed while a staff members continuing to work in the setting. And we provide additional funding for services that have a qualified inclusion coordinator in place. And we have a commitment to explore ways to reflect that extra role in wages. So we are now, through Nurturing Skills, we're committed to further developing distributed leadership roles like this. So at the moment, we're in the process of developing a second one that will similarly have a training program behind it and so on. And that's on family and community partnership coordination. So leading a services engagement with families and communities. But in Nurturing Skills, we also commit to future development of other distributed leadership roles. So the 2 that we've already named as for future work, one is on pedagogical leadership, and one is on what we call student practice placement and induction. And And I note a comment in the chat, somebody talking about the importance of induction and mentoring for new staff, and I very much agree. And that's definitely part of the reason why we see that as one of the distributed leadership roles we plan to develop. So that's one theme of the way we hope to strengthen leadership and career pathways over the years to come. Nurturing Skills also commits to further develop supports for management skills that are specific to EC settings. But one just final comment I'd make about Nurturing Skills and the approach we've taken is that we saw it as very important when we were developing this workforce plan that we would do it in a very consultative way with a strong stakeholder engagement. Educators, leaders, stakeholders were actively involved in the development of the workforce plan. We also built on research evidence. We looked at the OECD country policy review as well as the work the EU working group was doing. But that emphasis on stakeholder consultation, I think, was really key to ensuring that we the commitments we made in the policy plan were relevant. They matched where leaders were at the moment and the supports that they need. And that will change over time. So I've no doubt when we come to developing our next plan, it may look different. We'll be looking and seeing where we've got to, what needs strengthening next.
Thank you. And then you will need to come back and tell us how that went. So thanks a lot. I think it's really interesting to see this holistic approach and really building on what has been achieved before, learning lessons from what worked, like the LINK program, and now developing this and putting the means to make it happen. I think that is a really important thing when you have policy ambitions, to really make sure that you have the funding to make it happen and the regulations also to make it happen. So thanks a lot, Toby, and a great thanks again to Marco and to Nadia for sharing their experiences and their visions during this discussion. We now have a few minutes for questions to our speakers. Questions from the audience or questions from speakers to the other speakers. You can also ask questions to your peers. So I would invite you to pose your questions in the chat, and Mihaela will help me monitor and identify which questions we can take now.
I have seen two interesting questions, and I think Toby already referred to one of those. One question was related to mentoring and effective induction. How actually we should organize this so that we don't lose people that have been professionalized. So I think that's one of the big questions, and it is related with the second one, which relates to the shortage. I think it's about shortage of teachers, but I think also it's about shortage of leaders too. I think Hester mentioned, that the age of those that are holding this position is 50 plus. So it's like how we ensure that those that have the competences and have been professionalized stay in the sector, and moreover, they progress in their career as leaders and retain them as competent leaders. So what are the ways in which countries are addressing the problem of shortage of leaders or retaining them in that position while professionalizing them? And I think it's interesting to have the three countries that have made important strides in different directions. But I'm quite intrigued by the work that Ireland has done with the nurturing skills policy, but also in Slovenia on having I would say, old history of professionalizing leaders. So to what extent they are encountering any of these issues, and to what extent they think that they are on top of the issue with the plans that they have ahead. And these are perhaps the way that we can answer to both questions.
Any of our speakers would like to comment on that or add something? Yes, Toby.
So I'll make a couple of comments, but I don't have any easy answers. I certainly think that leadership in itself is key to addressing these issues of staff recruitment and retention. One of the things we like with many countries in Ireland, we have a challenge of staff recruitment and staff retention. We have a high staff turnover rate. We want to reduce it. It's too high. one of the things that is interesting looking at the figures is that the staff retention rate varies a lot between settings. It's not uniform. Some of that is maybe geographical issues. The cost of living is higher in some parts of the country. But I'm speculating here, but I can't help thinking that some of it is about the quality of leadership. In settings where there is strong leadership, there's better staff retention. And I don't think that's the only issue, but I think that's leadership matters. The question about how do we reduce staff shortages among leaders and ensure we can keep our leaders is tricky. I think there are a number of elements that have been touched on already in the discussions. Issues around pay and time, non-contact time, working conditions are very important. The work pressures and efforts to reduce administrative burden for leaders are very important. And also those supports, those mentoring and guidance supports for leaders so they feel supported. I certainly don't think we've solved those problems in Ireland. We're aware of them. We're trying to do things about them. Just on the admin burden, I think I mentioned earlier, we have a new report just published last year on plans to simplify our administrative requirements at a policy level to reduce the admin burden on leaders. Hopefully that will help. But I think those are some of the types of things that need doing, but they are not easy.
Thank you. I think, Nadia, you wanted to add something?
I was remembering external evaluation that I did to Erasmus KA3 about mentoring loop project. I hope people can research about that. They have different reports and instruments to support induction moment, the induction moment of the engagement with the system of teachers, and I think we can learn a little bit about this. That it's not only to do the mentoring, but do it strategically with very specific issues being addressed. And so we have to think what kind of instruments can be offered to support a mentoring system for leaders and teachers, of course, in induction periods, as teachers or as principals, as directors. So I think we can see some of the policy recommendations that this loop project that ended 2 years ago can give us about this issue.
Okay, thanks. I will turn to Marco. There's a question for you, Marco, in the chat from our colleague in Luxembourg, who has lots of questions about the training that you mentioned. How long does this formal training course take place in Slovenia? Does it lead to a national certificate? Is it compulsory? And can you tell us a little bit more about the formal training course that is available?
It's a nice starting question for creating a network, as Nadia would say, with a colleague from Luxembourg. Anyway, yeah, the program lasts for 1 year when you are appointed as a future principal. Even though you can enroll into this program if you're not going to be a principal yet, the program lasts, as I said, for 1 year. For now, it's structured as a 6-module program of different topics. And I would say that all the topics were mentioned today that are really tied with the competencies of a future leader. There was a part of the question.
Is there a national certificate at the end, and is it compulsory?
Yeah, it's a certificate, of course. But the other part was about private kindergartens, of course. Yes, it's mandatory if you are speaking about publicly recognized programs. So if the private kindergarten has a publicly recognized program, you have to obtain the certificate. But as I said, Yesterday we started our second session about rethinking the whole structure, not in the dev, but the framework of are we going to make any changes into changing the certificate, gaining the certificate of leadership.
Great. Marco, maybe if you have a link to your training program, you can put it in the chat so that people can look at it. And with the artificial intelligence now, we can all read Slovenian. Yeah. So that would be very informative, I think. Okay. Useful. Thank you. We'd like to hear the views from everybody. So thanks a lot for your inputs and for the discussions. We might come back to you after the little exercise that we will have now. I will pass the floor to Mihaela, as we would like to ask the audience their views on the topic. Mihaela.
Yes, and we are very thankful for the questions that have been put, and my colleague Jen already shared actually the link to the LinkedIn page of ECOS, where we'll continue, that such kind of conversations will continue. But since we are here, we wanted to share a few questions with you, colleagues, that are part of the discussion in an invisible way. There are two questions that we would like to ask you, and I will ask my colleagues to share the Menti link with you. One is from your perspectives, because I saw that there are many participants coming from really different parts of the world, and it would be interesting to see, in your view, what is one competence that the early childhood education and care leaders need more support with? As we were talking about induction and mentoring and support, I think it's so important to also understand from your perspective, from your systems, which are those competencies that we feel that are perhaps the weakest or the ones that need most of the support. So if you go to Menticom and you put the code 66834656, or you use the QR code, we would be really interested to see to read your input on this. It has been quite interesting, from my perspective at least, to hear about two things. I've been intrigued by Marcus mentioning the soft skills, the emotional skills that actually matter a lot in the leadership position. I know that when we talk about leaders, there's a lot of admin, management, a lot of heavy work that it sounds not that much emotional, while actually most of the part of the work that they have to do matters a lot because of that. And also Dante has a reference to networking, how we bring leaders together and how we nurture a culture of collaboration and exchange and learning from practice, because that's what they are mostly interested to exchange. Oh, what happened? Okay, we'll show up soon. So that was the part that I was also interested, to what extent, even in the induction and the mentoring and everything that we are doing to support them, how much, and the competencies that we build, how much weight actually is put on the soft skills. We're more concerned about the issue of accountability, because it is an important responsibility that they carry. But on the other hand, it's sometimes it just goes by, perhaps by default or implicitly, that these competences are equally important. Shall we share the screen in a while? Because we had two questions for our participants. But while our colleagues are answering, because we didn't ask you, which is the competence where you think that most leaders need support from the experience that you have had and from what you have learned in the training and providing guidance, even in terms of developing the policy documents that you all mentioned about. Which are those competencies where you feel that they need most support? Who would like to share? Please, Nadia.
So we started new courses in Portugal. The institutions that give courses to become a director in public schools are universities, and we are one of them. And we last year asked ourselves what kind of competence a leader needs to have to become a principal. And one of the subjects that we have is neuroscience, aligned with psychology, and because the leaders need to understand how the brain and how the emotions are regulated or could be regulated, and how can we engage with the children, parents, and colleagues in the best way. And we thought that neuroscience could be very important information for that. Another thing that we are investing, it's about how to manage human resources. How can we promote organizations with well-being, where well-being is in the center of the doing of the day life of organizations, and of course management, and of course inclusion education, and of course innovation, and of other issues. But the other universities already do that, and because we are the university that think about people and about well-being and about neuroscience, we have a lot of research in these areas. We build our course enrich with these dimensions that we think is very important. But again, I think it's very important that leaders can know how to read research, and can build research, and can research about their own organizations and practice. And this is soft skills, but this is very demanding. It's important that people continuing I'm sorry the word to reinforce this kind of competence along the way, and again to do that, networks are very important with universities, with teacher education centers, with policymakers, and everyone in community thinking about the issues of earlier education and about leadership and other pedagogical issues.
Jen? Oh, we have not so good news. It seems that the Mentimeter scientist just crashed. It happens. Then I will continue then, if you don't mind, Marco or Toby, if you want to also add anything. What is the type of competence that you have identified as being, the one that would need most support in your own countries?
If I can answer this question, I would like to stress out quite an important topic that is notable the last years, and it regards how to develop an inclusive approach in our institutions, what kind of tools, strategies, approaches, knowledge, competences at the end, of course, you have to not only emphasize, but sometimes also redevelop in trying to engage in forming, creating a more inclusive setting for everyone. It's quite an interesting shift in Slovenia that understanding inclusion, it's not only understanding and thinking about children with special needs in preschool or in school, but a lot of efforts are directed into accepting refugees, people from different language groups, different minorities, Roma children, specifically in Slovenia. And for the last 4 years, we're trying to have a developmental group of leaders, Not all of them are from the preschool area, unfortunately. And the groups are called the illusion of equity. And you're trying to engage different aspects from everyday life, how and in which ways we can contribute to reinforce inclusion, not only from the educational pedagogical area, but also mostly from the cultural area, and trying really to find, and I'm very happy because there are groups of principals gathering together, trying to also make some mini researches and trying to present their good practices and expertise on what have they already did or are going to plan to do on the topic of inclusive education overall.
Sounds fantastic. I think that we recall mentioning in one of the meetings of the working group the network of leaders that exists, and they meet regularly. So I think that's a structural aspect actually of supporting leaders that the system in Slovenia has put in place, which I think it's something that many countries actually could look at. Toby, what is from your perspective the competence?
Yes. So I would look, I agree with what the other panelists have said about the importance of certainly reflective practice and the importance of soft skills and inclusion. And I think the one thing I would say, I think it links to those issues around soft skills and inclusion. I think though the soft skills matter not only in terms of the team, the mentoring of staff, building that team, but they really matter also for engagement with families and communities. And I know in Ireland, something we hear from the inspectorates who are visiting and observing practice in services is we know that a few years ago, during the COVID pandemic, we know that parents were excluded from settings, and there was perhaps a loss of engagement between services and parents. And we are seeing it's taking a long time for that to rebuild. And there is a challenge really in engaging with families. And family engagement takes time, it takes skills, it needs consistency, and particularly I think when navigating issues like poverty or trauma that children may experience, that families experience, it requires a lot of sensitivity. So those soft skills are very important for engaging with families and communities, and can be very challenging for leaders to work on. So I think that links with what my other panelists have spoken about as well around issues of inclusion and reflective practice also.
Can I add something, Mihaela?
So the floor is yours, please.
I just wanted to bring in something else, which we have been working on quite a lot in the European Commission at the moment. It's the competence of leaders to actually be able to manage and prevent crises, because we live in a changing world with lots of threats and risks, climate change and many others. So I just wanted to point that we are currently working on reflecting how the schools, the systems, the teachers, and of course the leaders can actually play an important role in preventing this crisis and helping the children go through that, and also their staff go through that. And I'll just post, I will post in the chat a link to a report which we have developed recently, which is on the role of leaders to manage crisis, and it includes very practical tools to assess how their school is ready for any crisis which might come up, and also suggestions. So this is a competence which hasn't been discussed very much so far, but which is increasingly being talked about. So just wanted to bring that in, and I'll share this.
Yeah, and I think it's a very valid concern and a very valid way of responding to a possible or increasingly possible challenge for leaders. What concern I have is that we are expanding the portfolio of competencies and of knowledge that the leaders should have. And I just wonder to what extent they should be super people, super humans, or the only solution that we are heading towards is really what Toby was mentioning, the distributed leadership, and how we can build the capacity across different types of figures, people, actors in the system that can share the responsibility and be part of a leadership structure, not to actually center the power of decision in one person, but rather in a group of people that have been trained, prepared to take that responsibility. I think that's the way that we should look actually at the issue of leadership, and not only in early childhood education and care. I have to say, I think all the education structures share the same problem. I think that we could have had the same discussion perhaps with those that are leading primary school, secondary school, compulsory education, higher education, name it, that the number of responsibilities that they are carrying is growing. The competences are becoming increasingly complex, and it might be not possible for one person to carry them. And it should not be perhaps even fair that one person has to do it. So it should be rather a solution of distribution. But I think this is a topic that we would very much want to address in another discussion. And I will get back to this in a little while. I'm really sorry that our Mentimeter didn't work this time, but maybe, we will try to write them and complain how they have turned out our interactive moment from the initial plan. However, we are very grateful for all the questions and interventions that have put in the chat. We never consider one webinar the beginning and the end of the discussion. We're actually considering just a step forward in continuing thinking, reflecting together about it. And with this, I really want to thank to all colleagues that have accepted to be part of this panel, for Géraldine for moderating it, but also for all participants who chose to be with us today. I think that we have made it very simple, clear. Well, simple is not, but leadership is a very powerful lever, and it's a powerful lever for quality, for workforce motivation, and for meaningful and for lasting change. So perhaps what we wanted today to say is we talked a lot about it, but it's also about how we talk about enabling it. And we have had 3 examples from 3 countries that have made quite important strides toward real training pathways, clear career progression, and how they plan or already support leaders in their own roles. But I think it's also important that we understood that it is a system level problem, is how to support leadership. How leadership is defined and how it's supported is a system level problem. But also that the leadership should not sit with or only on an individual that sit at some top of a structure. It's about creating environments that where leadership is shared and is supported and is sustained across teams. I love the idea of having networks and having regular meetings. We know that that's what people working in the system need. And that's where actually real transformation begins. So at ECOS today, I think that we have had just the beginning of discussion. I said that, and I will ask also my colleagues, because now we talked about competencies and how we prepare and ensure a career progression. We are actually interested in retaining professional leaders, but also how we should move towards distributed leadership. And that's why we actually invite you to browse in our pages of ECOS for a live workshop that actually will take place as you can see, on May 11th, Pedagogical Leadership in Action, which is provided by our colleagues at VBJK and Ghent, who have had quite some experience in working on the issue of leadership, but now like how actually distributed leadership is put in action. And although it's not related necessarily to the issue of leadership, we also invite you to another interesting, I would say, offering that we have under ECOS, a virtual study visit in Slovenia, where we can see how working with families and teams can foster inclusion. Last but not least, I have to also invite you to our next, this will be one of a series of 2 events, and the next event will focus again on leadership, but with the focus primarily on the cross-sectoral collaboration to ensure leadership for inclusion. It was mentioned the issue of inclusion is an increasing concern for leaders and how to address it. And that's what we will also address in a new thought leadership as we have had today, but that will be in June and we will let you know. And so keep tuned on all the announcements that will come from ECOS. So thank you for being part of this conversation today and looking forward to see you all again. Thank you for all the comments, the questions, and big thank you for all the panelists and the moderator today. Have a good rest of the day and thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.